Well, Jay, I love to surround myself with smart people. There's just not enough smart people in my life because certainly I need help in many areas. But oh my goodness, we love the folks at MIDiA.
We sure do.
What else can you say? These people are sharp, and man, their reports are amazing.
Yeah, and we've got a great one. This is a very special bonus Your Morning Coffee podcast episode with our friends Mark Mulligan and Tatiana Cirisano from MIDiA. They're going to break down their new report, MIDiA Research 2024-2031 Global Music Forecasts, Rise of the Global South. And Mark will explain that, or as we refer to him now, Marpoo.
That's right. And you'll hear why we refer to him as that. The 2024 edition of MIDiA's Global Music Forecast captures a market at a crossroads with limited streaming user growth remaining in the West. Revenue growth will be fueled by price rises and ARPU increases, as well as an expansion in emerging markets, albeit at lower ARPU. Bifurcation represents a shift in the established order and growth in creative fandom-led non-DSP streaming forking away from consumption-led DSP streaming. Meanwhile, the physical resurgence will continue, but we'll have to reckon with new emerging avenues for fan engagement.
Yes.
Did I mention they're really smart, Jay?
That's exactly right. Mark and Tati are going to break down this comprehensive 70-plus page report. It also comes with a 40-page data set on 45 different countries and regions. The report and the data set are available as part of a MIDiA subscription and for purchase on the MIDiA Report store. So without further ado, here is Mark Mulligan, Tatiana Cirisano from MIDiA. Let it roll.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! Your morning coffee is on the air. On the air, on the air, on the air, on the air, on the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
The title of the report is the MIDiA Research 2024 to 2031 Global Music Forecasts. Subtitled "Rise of the Global South." I thought it'd be important to, for those of us that might be geographically challenged, to talk about what the global South is, and then also talk about your historical accuracy, because I love that you guys put that in the report. And if you have the same skills with like stocks, let me know, and I'll be sending money your way because you guys are on a roll.
Right. Well, let's start with the first bit. Global South is, I suppose, it's like a geopolitical shorthand for the countries that aren't the West. And it's slightly weird that, it's like we've ended up with dividing the world into the West and the South. It sort of seems to be missing a few poles of the compass. But nonetheless, it generally refers to Africa, Asia, Latin America. Now, clearly within those regions, there are some markets which are much more developed than others, but it's essentially just a way. We sort of think it's a little bit almost like, it's like overtones of colonialism, calling them emerging markets. It's really just trying to get a better way of talking about the world rather than saying, you guys aren't as far along as us.
Well, tell us a little bit about, to sort of set this up, how do MIDiA's reports differ from IFPI or RIAA reports?
Yeah, so I mean, both of those are really important sources in their own right, and we wouldn't try to be doing what they're doing because they do their jobs particularly well. I think what's different about us is, first of all, we are looking both back and forward. So clearly the trade associations are rarely in the business of projecting where a market's going to get to. And by the way, and this is like me geeking out slightly methodologically, we make forecasts, not projections. So the projections, you just say, well, yesterday was like this, so tomorrow is going to be a slightly different version of yesterday, and you're projecting forward what's happened. Projecting is part of forecasting, but forecasting is much more about taking a more considered and multivariate view of where could things go to, what are all the different variables you put together, and that gets you to forecasting where the world's going to get to. So trade associations typically don't do either projecting or forecasting, at least not for public consumption. So the forecasts are really important. I think the other bit is we have different remits, and we have different objectives, and we have different approaches. So one of the things that trade associations across all industries, so this is not just a music thing, they're informational, but they're also political. They serve a purpose to to further the objectives of their members, which is always going to mean that that has an impact on methodology, sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit. Again, this is not just a music thing, but trade associations have their membership fees paid by members, and membership fees are normally based upon the size of revenues of the company. So that means the bigger the company, the bigger their contributions, the bigger their influence on the trades association. So let's just say if music trade associations was a language, it's been spoken with a major label accent. So that's one of the things that we try to do, is try to make sure that we are paying just as much attention to the long tail as we are to the head.
Yeah, and I would just to even prove that out further. You asked about the forecast accuracy earlier, which I think we forgot to answer, but we definitely want to bring that up because our forecast for 2023 recorded music revenues last year ended up being 0.05% off of the actual market value. So that there is a proven track record here of us forecasting these things within a really close range of what the actuals end up being.
Yeah,
awesome.
And I think as well, Tati will be able to attest to this. It is a long, slow, painful process building media forecasts. There's a lot of work goes into it.
Yeah, I can only imagine. What made 2023 such an impressive year for the music business?
Well, I think I'll start. The world is upside down, right? Geopolitically, economically, and we've, all of us here on this podcast, and probably the majority of the listener base has had most of their lives where the world has been relatively boring and in a really good way, which hadn't been the case historically. Now I think we're moving into an era where there is a lot more uncertainty, and how that pertains to music is the economic uncertainty, inflation, interest rates, affordability of rent and mortgages, and all of those sort of things mean that people do not have as much disposable cash. They don't have as much job security. So it is a difficult economy for industries to operate in. And the fact that music has managed to perform so strongly when the economy has been so turbulent, I think really speaks volumes about the perennial and ongoing importance of music in people's lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would add that we also saw some of the first indications of the rise of a fan economy, which if you're listening to this podcast, you are probably sick of hearing the phrase monetizing fandom by now, because it's been on, everyone in the music industry's tongue this whole year. But we did start to see some of the indications of that. And that's coming from things like expanded rights with merch and branding. That's coming from physical, which we have a whole section on detailing how it's increasingly a fandom product rather than a consumption one. And also non-DSP streaming through things like social platforms and fitness and gaming. and these other spaces. So there's a lot of indication that this is going to be a growing part of the business. And that's a really good thing because we need to be diversifying the revenue streams of the industry.
According to the report, the global recorded market grew, it was up 8% in retail terms and reached $58 billion. What do you think is driving that growth, and what will drive your forecast of $100 billion and the doubling of the global audio streams by 2031?
Right. Lots of things is the answer.
What do we talk about first?
Yeah, but also I think it is the fact it is a that the answer is a lot of things, and B, the fact that it is a harder question to answer succinctly is actually part of the reason that the industry is in good health. You'd asked us a question 3 years ago. Streaming's driving everything. Now, is streaming still the majority of revenues, and will it remain the majority of revenues? Yes. But to Tati's point about the rise of the fan economy, we've seen the industry fired on so many different cylinders last year. Physical grew really well. We saw the rise of expanded rights. We saw the rise of non-DSP, so that's the streaming that happens outside the streaming services, TikTok and the like. We saw the rise of emerging. There you go. I said I wasn't going to call them emerging markets. The rise of the global south. We saw price increases. There's so many things which are now going into the mix, and the timing is perfect for it. And the reason why the timing is perfect is because in a lot of markets, streaming, subscriptions in particular, is maturing. So you can no longer rely on the thing that drove all the growth just to carry on growing like that, because there is a finite amount of growth left there. So, yeah, I would say lots of things. There's some of them. And the outlook for the future is a lot of those things getting bigger.
Yeah, and I think also all of these growth drivers will have very different trajectories as well over the period. So, just to give you an example with physical, we do see physical continuing to grow as a fandom product in the coming years. But we also think that by 2027 or so, we'll start to see digital versions of the things that are driving fans to buy vinyl that they're displaying on their wall rather than paying for it. Rather than listening to it. Yeah. We think we will start to see digital versions of these things replacing that. So eventually, we actually think that the physical growth will start to plateau and even decline. So that's something that is going through this. Not just this steady path of growth, but actually driving the industry for a few years. And then we start to see a shift into these digital spaces. So yeah, there's a lot of intricacy to all of this.
Speaking of things that we all talk about in the music business, tell us about how MIDiA approaches ARPU, which of course is average revenue per user.
Ooh, one of my favorite topics, and possibly one of the least interesting for 99% of the population, but super
you are
important.
Probably the only person that would ever say a sentence like that.
Yeah, I feel like I should change my name from Mark to Marpu, but anyway. So there's a lot in ARPU, and it's actually, I could easily fill your entire episode with this, so I'm going to give you a very edited highlight, but fundamentally, ARPU is complex and multi-layered, and it is too often thought about simplistically. So, the simplistic answer to ARPU, and by the way, just in case anybody doesn't know, that is really a measure of how much money is being made per person. And here we're specifically talking about subscriptions. The simplistic answer is, hey, let's just assume that prices are going to go up at a nice steady rate, and therefore ARPU will go up. So every time the price goes up by $1, ARPU goes up by $1. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And it doesn't work that way for a whole bunch of reasons, but here are a few of the most important ones. First of all, you could sort of do a blunt estimate for ARPU by saying how much revenue is there at the end of the year and divide it by how many subscribers were at the end of the year. But that's not really ARPU, because not all of those subscribers at the end of the year were subscribers at the start of the year. And lots of people who were subscribers in the middle of the year weren't subscribers at the end of the year. So you've got all of these. So what you need to measure is not the number of subscribers, but the number of subscriber months. So if somebody's been a subscriber all year, they have 12 subscriber months. If somebody only came in halfway through, they've only got 6. So you've got to calculate how many subscriber months there are. Well, that's the average. Then you've got to look at the price in all of the tiers. because a student plan costs a very different price than a family plan. And so you've got to work out how many subscribers are there on each of the tiers. What is the average subscriber months on each of the tiers, which means you've got to work out churn rates and acquisition rates on each of those tiers. And that's just to work it out in one country. But then you've got to think about, well, what happens when you have more subscribers on a multi-user like family plan, but not as many accounts? Because there's one account, but maybe 3 or 4 or 5 subscribers. And so on a subscriber basis, family plans are bad for ARPU because the average amount earned per person on the family plan is low. But on an account basis, it's really good because the account is worth more than an individual one. So the more your subscriber base that ends up on family plan, the lower your subscriber ARPU goes, even though your account ARPU goes up. And then you start thinking about, well, global South markets, sometimes they're 3 or 4 times lower ARPU. So if China is growing at a really high rate as a share of the total market, that's going to bring down global ARPU because the average Chinese subscriber is spending less than a US subscriber. And then we've got price increases come into the equation. Well, it's not simply the case you add $1 into price and everything stays the same and everybody pays $1 more, because some people will churn out, particularly if you put on $1 every year or two. And some of the people who are thinking of subscribing who haven't yet subscribed might not subscribe when they see the price has gone up. So there are lots of other variables as well, but you see, you have to consider all of those sort of things. So we built this massive, way overly complex ARPU model and a subscriber months model, and basically allowed us to test a few things out. And I mean, this isn't the exact numbers, but it's roughly the sort of ballpark. On a global basis, for every dollar that you put onto the price, all those other factors will knock off about 30 to 40 cents of global ARPU. Very different if you just looked in the US, for example, but on a global basis. So that's one of the reasons why we put so much effort into ARPU. I mean, we've always had, but particularly this year, because so much of the growth in the developed markets is going to come from ARPU growth. And you can't just say, let's just say prices are going to increase every year. That's my preaching from the methodology pulpit over.
And that really is just one snippet of how much longer I'm sure Mark could go on about ARPU.
Well, thank you, Marpu. We appreciate that. In the report, you break down market growth by looking at inhibitors versus drivers. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I think that it's all too often that people can try and take a black and white look at any one of these factors and say, okay, well, in the end, it's going to grow, or in the end, it's going to decline. And that's kind of the end of the story. But we felt it was really important to show the balance of inhibitors and drivers, because the truth is that every one of the segments that we dive into in the forecast report has things that are driving it and things that are pushing it down. So we did, for the first time this year, close each section with kind of a scale showing what direction that's tipping in. So we felt that was really important, just to show that there's a lot of nuance to these things. And it's not just a question of what's happening at the end of the day. It's also what are all the different drivers that are impacting that, because there are both drivers and inhibitors for everything.
Yeah, and you could look at, just say on the subscription side, you could say, okay, drivers of revenue, price increases, but that can also be a driver of churn, which means it's also an inhibitor. So sometimes things can sit on both sides. And
interesting.
You've obviously heard us talk about bifurcation, but we actually went and built bifurcation into the model. So in our scorecards, there's bifurcation impacts, and sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's net neutral. So it's like a sort of set of scales. And, we've got this scorecard that we populate, and Perry from our data team has built this sort of really elegant sort of set of, inputs and weights and whatever else. And it just enables us to go and play around with, well, what if we actually thought that, for example, even if NFTs don't come to pass, but digital fandom products do really begin to kick in, what if that really started competing for fandom among Gen Z and Gen Alpha? and you put that in and that becomes an inhibitor and you see how much it depresses it. But then you might sort of say, well, actually, what if you started doing lots of physical bundles with those? Then to what degree would that increase? So there's absolutely a lot of science to what we do, but there's also just as much art in it as well.
And math. Oh my God. I can only imagine.
A lot of math.
When we talk about the music industry's growth over the next 10 years, what markets are going to play a pivotal role in that growth?
China. No, I mean, quite seriously, China is, in terms of the changing shape of the market, of the global market, China is going to have an outsized impact. And the reason it's having an outsized impact is it is obviously a hugely populous country, and over the last decade has absolutely gone from the traditional term of emerging market into a very well-established high per capita GDP country. It's now, a really, really strong, just in terms of average income and education levels and whatever else. There's no real way you could call it an emerging market, not credibly anyway. And yet it's a tiny percentage of the population which are currently paying for subscriptions. So it's got this vast installed base of subscribers, which is already accounting and has been for years the majority of subscriber growth. And yet we're only scratching the surface of the number of Chinese people who are actually, paying for music. India, a similar story, way, way behind in the curve. I mean, fractionally smaller sort of share of the population and may never quite get to the levels that China has got to, at least in, a meaningful 10-year time frame. But nonetheless, there's a huge amount of growth left ahead of it. So those big populous markets with a lot of potential and have already, really started delivering, they're going to be really important. We also think, and Tati can talk about this in a lot more detail than I can, there's going to be a lot of cultural impact from more people coming online to stream, means that local artists now have an audience, and you start getting this virtuous circle of influence where music markets start to flourish, and in this democratized global world, as music export happens a lot more. But the final thing I'll say is, and the reason why I was being quite careful in my choice of language about how China is going to do most to change in terms of changing the shape and mix of the global market, the US is still absolutely going to dominate in terms of being the breadwinner, being the one which is delivering the most revenue. It's only a fractional change in terms of the US's share of total revenue.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think, this is a trend that's been going on for some time, but we're just seeing increasingly the decoupling of the centers of global music revenue from global music consumption and, by definition, culture. So even though Western countries will continue to dominate revenue, if so much of the music listening and scenes and fandom and culture are coming from the rest of the world, this is just another example of the bifurcation that Mark and I have been talking everyone's ears off about. And just to give you a little snippet, I hope I'm allowed to share this, but by 2031, just one top 4 recorded music market will also be a top 5 subscriber market. And that just goes to show this decoupling that we're seeing.
Wow. Super interesting. As I read through this report, and Mike and I love your reports, they seem to be written by a couple of, well, maybe more than a couple, music geeks like us. Is that accurate to say that you guys are, as well as being, data analysts or however you want to say that, it feels like it's coming from a place of passionate music fans?
Well, the last time Tati and I saw each other was 5 o'clock in the morning on a dance floor in Ibiza. So, yes.
If that doesn't answer your question.
So where can our listeners get not only this report, but you guys do so many great reports across all aspects of the music industry globally. Where can people learn more about you and learn more about these reports, and where can they get them?
Well, first of all, we've got a great blog, and we've also got a great newsletter. Yeah, and we've got a great newsletter. and I think the thing with the newsletter, which we always try to do, lots of newsletters you sign up to are just trying to sell you stuff, right? And that's not what our newsletter is about. What we've always tried to do as a company is we want our ideas to permeate the marketplace, not just to our clients. We want them to be everywhere. Fundamentally, we're just egotistical people who want to shape the way everybody think. And so we want our ideas to infect the world. And that's why we have our newsletter. That's why we have a blog. That's why we'll have, for this report, there's going to be a landing page where you're going to be able to get a free version of the report. Because this probably sounds a little bit high and mighty, but I like to think we have a sense of purpose. We're absolutely objective in everything we do, and we have a ridiculous degree of methodological rigor. But we can see not just where we think things are going, but where we think things should go. And that's part of the reason we invest so much time in putting stuff out on the blogs, on the newsletters, speaking at conferences, because we want people to hear how we think.
Mm-hmm. And we're also constantly on the road. So if you are going to any conferences coming up, chances are we'll be there and would love to chat. I'll be at Primavera Pro next week, or when, I don't know what that will be when this airs, but at the last week of May. So we're often at these events and conferences and happy to chat.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Boy, we certainly appreciate it. So thanks so much, you guys. We enjoy it. And I think we're both awestruck by all of the work that goes into it.
Mark, Tatiana, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure. And
happy.
Your love for our work is reciprocated with our love for your work. So keep it up.
All right. Thank you, guys.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.